Hey, what's up, you amazing hackers? I hope you're all doing well today. I have a special guest with me. Thank you so much for joining, sir. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, my name's Caleb. I have a channel called Studiosec. Basically, just kind of focuses on the fundamentals of cybersecurity. Kind of newish to the industry. I've been pretty familiar with it for a while, but graduated last year, so kind of dumping my memories as they are fresh. But very excited to be on here, man.
Awesome. That's really cool to have you. Thanks for being here. Um, before this video, you were talking about that you were a blue teamer. That's really interesting to me because, of course, I come from a completely different perspective. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do in the blue teaming field?
Yeah, I'm on like the engineering side, so just kind of some systems admin, but just kind of working on some of the security platforms that we use. Uh, Unfortunately, can't get too much into specifics there, but that's kind of just the area that I'm in.
That's really freaking awesome. You told me as well that you wanted to learn some red teaming techniques and get some more into red teaming. As a blue teamer, from your perspective, is it harder to get into red teaming than it would be from like a completely blank perspective, for example? Or
That's actually, I was thinking about that earlier today because that's an interesting question. I think so. Before I actually started working, I'd say like the policy and conceptual side of security like clicked, and like I'm like I guess comfortable with like that end, but the more technical side I needed some work on, and so I think if I tried jumping straight into the offensive security side without really taking time to learn how to do some of the more technical stuff just from you know any side, like a blue team side, a networking side, whatever, then I think I'd have a much more challenging time picking that up and actually applying it than probably right now, where I could probably get into it and not have as much of a hard time as before. So
yeah, that's really interesting. I've always thought of it in two ways, like you in the same way, but also maybe you can have a little bit of a skewed perspective on some concepts because you're looking more from a defensive perspective, where we as attackers are looking for more of an attacking perspective, which in my opinion is a little bit different because you guys you have to be right all of the time and we only have to be right once. Does that bring any extra stress to your work?
yeah, it's interesting because I mean, man, it it it's a little nerve wracking, but after a while, I mean that's just kind of the environment you're in, so you got to kind of just run with it. Um, win the small battles, and the bigger battles will kind of fall into place. Take care of the foundations, and the building will stand tall. And not try to make it look too pretty without if you prettify it before you actually have a solid foundation, the building's going to crumble. So it's really just those small things, those day-to-day practices that you got to put in place, and that's really where those foundational concepts come in. Once you nail those, you really got, I mean, probably like what 70-80% of the ballpark ball of the ball game there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've been creating some labs for my course, and while creating them, it's brought a new perspective for me on that blue teaming side, like sanitizing user input, for example. I've always been a developer, but I've been sort of a backend developer. I take system input and I pass it to other systems. I'm not used to handling user input, and this has taught me so much about how creative and ingenious humans can be. I asked that question because I was always a little bit worried that I wanted to become a blue teamer as well at first. But for me, I was always a little bit worried that you had to be very secure and very diligent because, like we talked about, if you leave one hole, hackers are going to find it. Um, one thing that I've noticed while creating those laboratories is that I'm always watching my back. I've started to develop these concepts in my head, and it carried over in my day-to-day practice a little bit, also for my red teaming. Everything I do now is pretty much based around security. I think about it constantly. My phone is locked up properly. Has that security aspect brought something back for you in your life as well?
Like outside of like my work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of just naturally a bit of a cynic. So it's, there's always kind of that skepticism of just things in general. Like, I don't know how to put it there. Like, it's like trust but verify. That's like the saying, really. It's trust but verify. And so there's a lot of verification. Like, even just day to day, like let's say like a buddy, shoots me a text with a link, and I like send him a message on like another medium, like, hey, was this you? Like that, I know that it's them. Like, I don't need to do that, but it's just kind of like that the cynic in me that's just like, but what if they found me? It's a little silly. But I'm sure you've experienced that, with the, quality assurance side that you're on. Sometimes if it's on your mind, it's on your mind, and it's not going to leave your mind once you close your laptop for work.
Exactly. I also verify things all of the time. And like you, I started testing that's one thing that came from my red teaming experiences. I started testing all of the things that I use daily. Like the website that I use to order my food on, I test that now. And that's insane that I get to do that. That's a good thing that came from bug bounties, because verification is very important to me as well. I'm going to segue a little bit into that. When somebody comes to me, I've done a couple of hirings before, and I always need to verify who they are. I need to verify who I have in front of me. In your field, do certifications weigh very heavily, do you think? Or is it more of an experience-based kind of thing?
That's an interesting question. So, I mean, whenever I started my position, the only certification, I mean, still really that I have is the CompTIA Security Plus, which is still, those cybersecurity fundamentals. I think it's more an experience type of thing, but I think at least in my experience with my current employer, just the people I'm working with, they kind of have that understanding that, especially if you're coming right out of college, um, you're going to be kind of green and they'll be willing to take you under their wing and really, mentor you and get you up to speed. And it's going to take time. There's just so much to learn. It's like you said, I keep saying the enemy, because that's just kind of I don't know, my framework there, but it's like the enemy only has to be right once, right? Or at least at the very least, they have to string being right once enough times to hit pay dirt. And that, that the surface, the attack surface that they're working with against you, depending on like the size of your organization, can be so large that it's daunting. And they know that, because they're working with you. And so they're totally down to just, help you out, help you learn, hey, here are those tiny little battles that you got to win every single day. And if we win these battles every single day, we'll be a majority of the way there.
Yeah, for sure. That's something that I've been hearing about in the industry a lot as well. Winning those small battles is very, very important, and making sure that you have your your base covered, like you said before. That's something I find very important as well. Your majority of your rules should be set, so you have the rest covered. If you think about, like, for you, what would you say some of those base rules are? Like, for me, it would be to always sanitize user input, for example. Do you have some of those base tips that you can give to our viewers to help secure their applications in general or their infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, one that comes off the top of my head is just make sure that things aren't touching the internet that should not be touching the internet, like internal servers and devices. I know SolarWinds is kind of one of the latest examples on how that can be a bit of an issue. And then another is just update, patch. If you go, on Twitter and you check like hashtag Patch Tuesday. I mean, hey, and like I mentioned it like my last news video is like, have Taco Tuesday, and then like while you're doing Taco Tuesday, do some patches, because a lot of people running, older versions of Exchange that might have been a little nervous to upgrade for whatever reason, configuration, what have you. They're paying for it. They're potentially paying for it because that's another huge cyber attack that we're talking about now. So, really making sure and being diligent that your infrastructure is, tucked behind a firewall and not, accessible to the internet. And then that you're installing updates and patches routinely. And then I guess a third point would be password management, making sure that each end user, is being pretty diligent about their password. And these are really, they're not, I guess, the, super sexy technical, things that, we nerds, as I said, like to, walk away with. But like, I mean, that's something that's applicable for just about everybody, because a lot of like small to medium-sized businesses can't deploy, a large or even medium-sized IT staff. And so it's really those fundamental things of, password management, updates, like those can really go a long way and, really mitigate your attack surface.
Yes, even though we all find them annoying, we have to keep our systems updated. Um, for passwords, one thing I wanted to give our viewers as well is a lot of people go for complex passwords, have a number in there, have a special character in there, sacrifice your firstborn child, all of those different requirements. Do you think that's a good approach to passwords, or do you think we should maybe look at it a different way?
Yeah, length is really the better way, to be honest. I mean, complexity, you can't go wrong, but you want to combine that with length. Because, I mean, as you know, there are so many ways to break passwords, especially, the beefier computer you have, the faster it is to break even really complex passwords. It doesn't matter if you have a super complex 8-digit password. If, an attacker is coming in with a beefy computer and they're patient, they'll get that password. But if you have like a 20, 25 character password, and I have to do a better job personally about this too, is using the word passphrase instead of password, because it's kind of what would be a better way of remembering it is, you're using a phrase, or it's better to use a phrase, unless you know a 25 character word. A phrase is a bit better, right? And so, and better yet, mix in some complexity, because why the heck not? But yeah, I think length is probably the thing you'd want to go for there.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with you on that. And also because we were talking about users here, I know how users work in an organization. Oh, I need a complex password. Fine, let me just enter all of these special characters that I see on my keyboard and row. Okay, that's my password now. So
Yeah.
people always find a way around that stuff. And like you say, cracking a 25 character password is going to take ages. It doesn't matter what kind of computer you have. One thing I also wanted to ask you is, do you think that Corona has caused some problems, or at least some more vulnerabilities with these internet-facing things that companies have open now?
Man, I mean, for sure. Because, I mean, if you think about all the, and kind of like with like small to medium sized businesses that don't have their own IT staff, um, suddenly having to transition to an all remote workforce, like just like that, without even if they had been planning, to go remote, but maybe they had to go remote sooner than they were actually logistically prepared for. You're going to run into some issues there. And, you know, yeah, sure. And that's going to be kind of difficult too, as far as like the internet facing infrastructure goes. But like even like Zoom security, I mean, at the start of coronavirus, I'm sure you remember some of the horror stories of, Zoom meetings just getting broken into. Like Zoom had to push up an entire, I think it was Zoom 5.0 is whenever they had to like, improve their encryption because the encryption got broken by a cybersecurity researcher. So, I think everybody was kind of caught off guard. And it's just the way it was, it was, what a weird time to be alive. So.
Yeah, that remote work, I think it's something that's going to stick around as well, even after this whole strange situation ends. So, do you think it would be wise for companies to invest more in some of the major players, like, say, for example, Microsoft SharePoint storage, instead of having their own NAS somewhere in a server building? Because, sorry.
Oh, no, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. Uh, I think it really just depends on the business, to be honest, because especially if you're a smaller business, you can get better, you can probably get some better security, but better service if you outsource to a company like Microsoft, because their sole job the team that's responsible for that, whatever particular service, their sole job is making that service as good as it can be for you. Whereas if you try to do it on your own, the costs are going to balloon and you're probably not going to get the same kind of service that you might be hoping for. And that's, but it's a challenge that I know of a lot of small businesses really struggling to kind of make that decision on. But, and even like a hybrid, like a mix, like, you take on some functions, like, and then you have, a cloud provider or whatever take on other functions. Because, especially whenever you think of like whatever data you're storing, that can be an interesting conversation too. But yeah, it really just depends on the data, on the industry, on the business needs and position to take advantage of particular services.
Yeah, for sure. Those are some interesting points, especially the costs and the data. Like GDPR here in Europe doesn't allow us to store any kind of personal data on servers outside of Europe. So you have to be very careful about that. And the cost factor as well. But for companies, like, I've heard a lot of companies say it costs so much money to do these pen tests. Do you have any arguments against those companies to help convince them that it's worth the money for those pen tests?
Yeah, I mean, the financial constraint is real, but if you think and here's a challenge. I know, like, a lot of business people that obviously aren't in the cybersecurity industry, they see kind of cybersecurity as it's a hassle. It's just a bunch of guys that are constantly, or gals or whatever, like constantly telling us, hey, change your passwords, do this, do that. And it's a big money suck, because they're constantly asking for all these capabilities and they're not bringing money in. Like, they're not like, unless you're a security company, your security team is going to cost you money, but they're not going to put you in the green. Right. And so, throwing pen testing on top of that can be a bit of a mental hurdle. And the reason I say but is it's an investment. And you're not really investing in a potential payout. It's more like insurance. I think that's really the analogy I should make here. You are paying so disaster doesn't strike, because the costs of a breach are going to be so exponentially high most of the time that you're going to wish that you paid for that pen test so you could have learned the lessons that you learned in the breach, for whatever tiny amount of the cost in like a private environment. And that way, your company's not getting blown up, on the world stage. We, at least, and maybe this is just me being, not paying attention to Silicon Valley as much, but the startup, I can't remember the name of the startup that does security cameras, that just got breached. The only reason I know about that startup is because they got breached, and those security cameras got breached. but I'm sure they would have rather me have found out about those products just naturally on the market. And they learn those lessons by hiring a pen tester. So yeah, that's kind of my response there.
Really good arguments. I would definitely use those if I wanted to convince my manager. We talked about data a little bit as well, and I see all of these security companies popping up, and I see blue teamers, red teamers. It doesn't matter to me. I'm very skeptical like you. And when I see people, security companies popping up, I always wonder, okay, how are these people going to protect my data from their own internal employees? Is that something you think more companies should be wary about, their own internal employees?
You know, that's an interesting conversation, especially because and the first thing that pops into my mind there is, I mean, it's not individuals, at least not that we know of, but Microsoft, I think it was Microsoft announced that they're investigating, or it was leaked that they're investigating that the patches for the Exchange patch, like about that hack, that information got leaked, which is why the attacker accelerated the attack by automating it. And insider threat, I mean, is freaky. You know, if we thought supply chain, you know, the supply chain as a security threat with SolarWinds was scary. I mean, think about someone that you have internally hired that you're trusting with confidential information, turning that over to an adversary or being an adversary themselves. I don't know if you're a fan of Mr. Robot. I love Mr. Robot, but when Elliot Alderson is working for eCorp, and I mean, if you think about it, that's, I mean, they thought that hiring him would be a good idea, or even at the very beginning when he was working for their contracting company, they thought that it would be, you know, okay to trust this individual to work for them, and trust them with confidential information, but all the while he's just soaking information in about his target. That's pretty freaky. So I mean, definitely it is trust but verify, but finding that verification process is a challenge. I know with, you know, governments, you'll have some kind of like a security clearance process, but implementing a process like that in a business environment, I don't know what the reaction to that would be, especially if it's not a government contractor or a security company, you know. Well, but it would have to be a security company in this particular issue. But yeah, some kind of verification process, some kind of a clearance process. Yeah, I mean, that's just the only thing that comes to mind there.
The fact that I've worked at a bank, the fact that I've been able to access production data about everybody that I wanted to without even flinching if I wanted to. And the fact that they didn't even know I was a hacker, that scares me a little bit. So yeah, I also have that concern. One last thing I wanted to ask you, and thank you very much for your time, is do you have any last tips for our viewers watching to better secure themselves at home?
Yeah, I mean, obviously passwords. Change the default passwords if you have IoT devices. You know, that, I mean, honestly, that can be a really, really big one, but it's also kind of the biggest pain in the butt. So really using like a password manager, that's the best one. So, yeah. But and then if you're wanting to get into cybersecurity, you know, just learn the fundamentals, you know, and then follow thexssrat.
Thank you very much, my friend. If anybody wants to follow my good friend here, the links will be in the description below. Thank you very much for being on the channel. It was a pleasure having you, and I hope I'll see you soon.
Dude, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Bye, everybody. See you later.